welcome to Your Family Dog, a podcast dedicated to helping families love living with dogs. Here are your hosts, Julie Fudge Smith and Colleen Pilar.
Hi, and welcome back to Your Family Dog. I'm Julie Fudge Smith, and today Colleen Pilar cannot be here, but I am here with Sue Sternberg. Very excited to have her as a guest. She has over 35 years of dog behavior experience, including as a dog control officer, a kennel and animal care technician, a dog trainer, behavior consultant, instructor, and temperament evaluator, boarding kennel owner, veterinary assistant. She is a successful competitor in a variety of dog sports. And in 1993, she started her own dog shelter in upstate New York and has created national shelter outreach programs to improve the lives of shelter dogs and people. She has two main goals in life: to make the shelter world a better place for dogs and the community, and to make public dog parks a safer and more fun experience for the dogs who must use them. She is the author of numerous books and has published many DVDs. They can all be found at dogwise.com, and we'll have a link to that on the show notes. She has two wonderful adopted heeler mixes. She's an accomplished fiddle player, and she's a major Star Trek fan. So if we don't want to talk about dogs, we can always talk about Star Trek. So, always. So thank you, Sue, for joining us. What I really wanted to talk about today with you is shelters. What should people be looking for when they want to choose a shelter? And then secondly, once they've chosen a shelter that they're happy with, how do you choose a shelter dog? Because I think so many people are really concerned about getting dogs out of shelters. And we certainly talked to Madeline Bernstein about designer dogs and the plethora of dogs that are now found in shelters. And certainly she's a big advocate for shelter dogs. So let's start with, what do you look for when you're trying to evaluate whether a shelter is one you want to work with?
I'll start with the giant paradox, which is, or maybe it's not a paradox, but I'll start with something surprising, and that is I would stay away from what are labeled or what you think are no-kill shelters. Mm-hmm. The term no-kill is really divisive in the industry, but nobody wants to euthanize. But shelters that don't euthanize dogs tend to get filled up with unadoptable dogs. Mm-hmm. And so it's a complicated issue, because to be able to use the word no-kill to describe your own shelter, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't euthanize. It simply means, well, it can mean a number of different things. For some shelters, it means they don't euthanize at all, except in the case of severe medical problems. And a lot of shelters, even then, they don't. But what you want to know from a shelter is that that they do euthanize. And the reason for that is there's three basic categories of dogs. And this, I'm going to say it in a gross way, and then I'll describe it more scientifically. But the three categories of dogs are good dogs, bad dogs, and borderline dogs. And nobody likes the term bad dogs. But what I mean by that is a good dog is one that has high thresholds for aggression in all categories. In other words, it would take an unusual amount of stress and bad events and things all coming together to get that dog to even want to bite or think about biting a human or. So that's a good dog. And those make the best pet dogs. They're the safest dogs in the community. This is what we hope everyone is breeding deliberately, although I don't think that is always people's first priority. The second category of dog, the bad dogs, are dogs who are dangerous. They have low thresholds in two or more categories of aggression, either to people, guarding things, other dogs, or whatever. And their thresholds are so low that even with a professional trainer living on Mars with no other people around, the dog would probably have a hospitalizing event. In other words, it's not just a matter of, can you train it right or handle it right? The dog is so dangerous that he's not going to make it in society. And the third category are the borderline or gray area dogs. And if a shelter doesn't do behavior evaluations, then they don't have any idea which category any dog might belong to.
Correct.
Puppy. And so the best shelters are the ones that are trying to do behavioral triage and are trying to place those dogs into categories. And are also good shelters care about who the adopter is. In other words, are you a professional trainer and you're going to a shelter because you want a dog that would be a really fun nose work or scent detection sport dog? Or are you a family or pregnant or going to have children, or you're grandparents and you have grandkids visiting and you're not looking for a behavior challenge, you just want a nice pet? So the best shelters care about you, the adopter, and care about the behavior and temperament of their dogs. And the thing about a shelter, and I know I'm rambling on and on, but the thing about shelters is let's say you have 50 kennels, okay? So you have housing for 50 dogs. And let's say you open your shelter on January 1st, 2018. Okay. And 50 kennels. And you can probably fill up pretty quickly. And of those 50 dogs, and it varies in different regions of the country, but of those 50 dogs, you're going to have dogs in all three categories. You're going to have some dangerous, you're going to have some good dogs, and you're going to have some gray area dogs. Right now, in most shelters, the largest category is the borderline gray area dog. And the very smallest categories are usually the good ones and the dangerous ones. Now, if you don't euthanize, then let's say you have your 50 dogs and you have, whatever, your good dogs will get adopted really quickly. The people just select them. They connect with them. So your good dogs get adopted. Let's say you had 10 good dogs out of 50. So now, and then you have 2 gray area dogs that get adopted, and your dangerous ones hopefully and usually don't get adopted. So you have now 12 kennels, right? So of your new 12 dogs that come in, you'll have a couple that are good, a few that are gray area, and maybe 1 or 2 that are dangerous. So then you have, let's say, 3 adoptable dogs, and they get adopted, and 1 gray area dog gets adopted because they don't get adopted quickly because they have to find just the right person, just the right environment. So then very quickly, your shelter is filled with gray area dogs and dangerous dogs.
Right.
One of the reasons, if you're looking to adopt the dog, you want to know that a shelter does some sort of behavioral triage and does, if they're a sanctuary and they're keeping dogs forever, I would recommend staying away, actually. Well, I'm going to get hate mail.
Well, we probably are too, but I happen to agree with you. And in fact, what's interesting is that in the last couple of weeks, I've had almost exactly that same conversation with 2 individuals about the difference between a no-kill and what I call a low-kill shelter.
Right.
What we're looking for is unfortunately, there are dogs who are not adoptable. There are dogs who are, for lack of a better term, now I'm going to get hate mail, repeat offenders, that they get adopted out, then they get brought back to the shelter, and they get adopted out, and they get brought back to the shelter. And after a couple of times, I mean, I've seen dogs, my clients have adopted dogs who they're the 4th person to try and adopt this dog, and it doesn't work. And at some point, you've got to say, it can't be all the adopters. There has to be something amiss with the dog. And if you're not willing to say that, then you are subjecting all of these, and so many of these people are young families. They've never had a dog. This is their first experience, and they are heartbroken. And I have had them say to me, I will never adopt again. I cannot put myself or my children through that. So now you have these people who are not willing to adopt, who have been burned terribly by a dog who is perhaps vicious towards one of their children. And then the poor dog keeps getting recycled and does not have quality of life. So it is it's a very difficult situation. And then I feel so bad for the shelter workers who have to go through this, to see this heartbreaking thing happen time and time again. It's incredibly stressful, I think, on the shelter workers as well. So you have 3 populations who are not being served particularly well.
Right.
So how does one go about choosing a shelter? what are the kind of questions they should be asking or looking, like if they're looking at the website for a particular shelter, what are some of the things they should be looking for that they see on the website, or questions that they should be asking at the shelter that will give them an idea if this is a place they want to be?
Well, it's so interesting because, sometimes the multi-million-dollar facilities are good ones to go to if they do behavior evaluations and they're really thorough about trying to figure out who their dogs are and wanting to find a really good fit. And so you can see that on some of the websites. But I would also have to say, if I were going to try and adopt a great dog, and I was going to do it independently, the odds of finding just a sweetheart young dog that is really good, your odds go up in the rural southern portions of the United States.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's odd, and nobody knows why. Possibly they have more overpopulation because they have 2 breeding cycles a year in the South, whereas if you live in the North, you have winter, and so maybe you just don't have as many dogs because your bitches aren't breeding twice a year if you leave them outside. Okay. But there seems to be more to it than just that. Like there seems to be something temperamental that happens to these rural Southern dogs. And I have some hypotheses as to why that is, but it's all supposition. But it's interesting. So if I were on my own and I didn't need the shelter to discriminate and to really assess the behavior and temperament of the dogs, I would drive down and go to little animal control facilities in rural Texas and Arkansas and Louisiana. And I would go through the kennels and look for a soft, squishy, waggy, submissive dog that's just squinting and in front of the kennel and wants to squeeze through the bars at me. Because you can still find those dogs in the rural shelters. And again, the giant, I guess it's an irony that a lot of the smaller shelters and more animal control facilities really they don't have as many resources as some of the big multi-million-dollar facilities, and the dogs have a shorter period of time that they're available. They might get euthanized a little faster, not in any way because people don't care, but simply because they just don't have the money or the resources or the number of adopters that we have in larger urban areas and on either coast. So you might arbitrarily be more likely to find a good dog in a rural Southern shelter, but I think I would look for a shelter that really thoroughly evaluates its dogs and cares about the adopter as much as they care about their dogs. And that, unfortunately, that's getting rarer in the shelter world. A lot of decisions are made that err on the side with the dog and hope, that he finds just the right home, or maybe the 5th time he gets adopted or the 6th time he gets adopted, it'll stick. And they're not really looking out for the community, the safety of the community and the health and happiness of the families coming in to adopt. So I would want a happy medium.
Right. The other thing, I know that sometimes what happens in shelters is they will have in an attempt to sort of move dogs along, they'll do things like waive adoption fees. Yes. And I don't know about you, but I have mixed feelings about that, because I kind of feel like if you're not paying anything for the dog, you haven't invested anything in the dog either. So my own feeling on that is that completely waiving adoption fees, maybe we lower them. My husband's grandmother used to I think, breed Cocker Spaniels. And she said, I don't care if I charge just $5 a dog. I need to have them invested in the dog.
Right.
And so I think that sometimes in our attempts to find these forever homes, we don't often think about the consequences of some of the actions that we take to find these forever homes. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. I know that there's people tend to think in terms of shelters or rescue groups, the private ones as being perhaps better than public facilities. And I have not found that to be to be true in particular.
Yep. I agree with that. And the thing about spending money on an animal, they're expensive to own. I mean,
They are.
if you have a dog, even the bare minimum, you're looking at a fair amount of money. One of my beliefs is always that the shelter has a responsibility in any community to promote and help maintain a humane society. And it was the original name, right? That's sort of the generic name for a shelter is a humane society. But to me, a humane society, when people hear that word now, they just think it's a shelter, right?
Mm-hmm.
A physical where you can go adopt a dog. But to me, a humane society was our original goal in the shelter world, and should still be. It should still be our goal. We should be the ones looking out for and modeling in our community how to be humane to each other and to living creatures. And so part of that is helping people become the best caregivers that they can be. And the three ways that people sometimes need help being a great caregiver, one of the ways is financial. Like sometimes all the only difference between one person who has to give up their dog and another is the dog has a broken leg and they can't afford to fix it, and the vet charges a certain amount of money, rightfully so. It's a service. I'm not at all veterinarians, but it's too much for the people. So then some rescue group or some shelter gets involved. They take the dog, they repair the leg. The veterinarian might even donate part of the fees, and the original owner is not part of that. Like they're not given the dog, which is ridiculous to me. It's like if somebody needs some financial help and they want to keep their dog and they love their dog, well, we should do whatever possible in the shelter world to help them keep that dog. And that sometimes means I think we should be able to give them financial help when the time comes, not to pay for everything, but to pay for those things that might be a deal breaker. And the other thing is just basic care education. It's not common sense how to take care of a dog and what a dog needs. If you've not lived with one, you just don't know. You don't know what fleas look like. You don't know that they could get ticks. You don't know how to cut a dog's toenails. And I always feel like the shelter should be the place where people can go for some basic care education and tips with no judgment. And the third way people often need help is with behavior and training. And a lot of communities, a lot of areas in a community are not served by private trainers. And group classes may be too far for some people to travel and too cost prohibitive. But I always feel like we could give people financial help. But I feel like, dogs are valuable. They're valuable as our best friends and family members. And so people should pay something that they can. And I also feel like every once in a while, somebody might come along that is a great caregiver that has an attachment to the dog they've met. And maybe the adoption fee should be lowered for that person in that instance, because they would be a great caregiver and they will need every penny to help make it work. But and this is a side thing, but I hear so often now conversations, often between dog trainers, and the conversation goes like this. They're lamenting a client who just spent $2,500 on a doodle, some poodle mix.
Right.
And they're criticizing the people for how could they spend $2,500 for a mixed breed, for a mutt? And that rankles me, and it does for a couple of reasons. One is if you can get $2,500 for a puppy in your litter, I think you're good at marketing and you're a good business person. To get for a puppy. But to me, like, if my dogs had cost me $2,500, which they didn't, but I would have paid it. They are worth millions to me. They are such great dogs. It doesn't, like, value shouldn't be because it's a purebred or mixed breed. Value is the dog. So if somebody's going to pay $2,500, look, if they want to pay $2,500, they can. I paid $44 for one of my dogs at a shelter in Texas. They could have used $2,500 for sure. I think what I got, maybe she's not hypoallergenic, but I'm betting your doodle isn't either. But but again, I just think dogs should be valuable, and the idea that some dogs are more valuable than others is not good. They're dogs. We should value all of them: the mixed, the pure, the cross, the
Right.
the deliberate,
Right.
the dental. They're valuable. They're dogs.
I agree. I was thinking that we did an episode on affordable dog care in Your Family Dog. And one of the things that we did make a link to, and I will put a link to it in this podcast as well, was 2 areas to where you can find on the Humane Society of the United States, and I think another one, where you can look for financial help in your particular area. You can search by zip code for financial help with dealing with your dogs. I at one point had started a charity called it was a Good Dog Foundation, is what it was, and we provided financial aid to low-income families for non-elective care for their dog. So, for example, we had one little old lady whose dog needed seizure medication, and so we paid for her dog's seizure medication for a full year. And she was able to keep her dog.
Right. I think that's so great.
Yeah. Well, we had to close the charity for a variety of reasons. I felt bad about doing that. But it was one of the reasons we had to close was because getting donations, we'd get donations, but it could be very quickly. I mean, a dog has to have any kind of orthopedic surgery, and you're talking a phenomenal amount of money that was very difficult for us to replenish. So we found that we just couldn't keep our coffers full enough to really provide the aid that we had wanted to provide, which is unfortunate.
It is.
But I also think that one of the things is I know that there's a shelter in Columbus that is one of the city shelters. And a lot of the behaviorists, the veterinary animal behaviorists at OSU do work at this shelter. They have set up programs and they've done studies. And one of the things that they really want to do, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this is another way in which somebody might be able to assess whether this is a shelter that would be one they want to work with, is they make sure that all these dogs get enrichment. So one of the things is they do some basic training so that these dogs have better like cage manners. So they come to the front of the cage, and so that they greet people, and so that they know how to sit. And these dogs also get enrichment toys so that they're not just stuck in a kennel with nothing to do. And so I think that if you're going to be assessing a shelter or a rescue group, ask them what they do to enrich the lives of their dogs on a daily basis. I think that will give you a real key. Even something as tiny as make sure these dogs get a toy and a stuffed Kong every day. That makes a big difference in the quality of these dogs' lives.
Yes, absolutely. Especially we're holding dogs longer and longer periods as the numbers come down.
Right.
And we've got to take care of their mental, behavioral, and emotional health while they're with us.
Right. And some dogs do much better in a shelter environment than others. Some, it's an incredibly debilitating environment for them. Others have a little bit hardier disposition, shall we say, and can handle the shelter environment a little bit better. So I have used your temperament test with clients' dogs and in shelter dogs, and I have to say that I really like what you do, because I feel like with your particular temperament test, you are very good at keeping both the person who's doing the temperament test safe as well as the dog. And I think that's very critical, because if you don't know, the reason you're doing the temperament test is to find out what kind of a dog this is.
Right.
So it's very important that you keep the tester as well as the dog safe. So when people ask me, what do I look for in a dog? I oftentimes refer back to you. And the first thing I tell them is you need a social drive with your dog. So I was wondering if you could address what we mean by social drive and maybe 2 or 3 things people can actually do to assess a dog to see whether or not they've got the social drive they're looking for.
Yes. So, I mean, sociability, that's the dog's innate attraction to, affection for, and deference to humans is probably the most important trait.
Absolutely.
And if that would be the only thing I could judge a dog on, if I could only judge a dog on one thing, it would be on his sociability to people. And it's critical. And the good news is it is visible through the kennel, from outside the kennel. So it is something that you can absolutely see. And I actually have been studying the a 6-second kennel test outside the kennel and comparing it with a longer sociability test outside the kennel, which would take more of a professional to do. And there's strong correlation, at least in weeding out the dangerous and the highly social. So and this is what I would advise people going to a shelter. They're looking to adopt a dog. Maybe the shelter doesn't have a lot of resources, or they don't do assessments, or they do assessments but ignore the results, or they, which is pretty common. But
yeah, so it is, unfortunately.
I would walk up to, and I would do it fairly objectively. I would walk up to a kennel, and if the dog were the size of a beagle, I would bend down. So, and if it were a Great Dane, I would stand up. So I want to modify what I'm going to do with my hand to the size of the dog. And what I want to do is make a loose fist with the back of my hand facing up, and I will extend it as close to the kennel chain link as possible, without being in reach of a dog's teeth. Make sure that he can't actually. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to present my fist 4 times, and I'm going to imagine a square about 5 inches by 5 inches, and I'm going to hit the 4 corners of the square, all 4 points, and I'm going to do it in a Z. So the top left corner, the top right corner, the bottom left corner, and the bottom right corner. And I'm going to make that 5-inch square wherever the dog's face is. So if the dog jumped up on the kennel and he's staying up on the kennel, I'm going to do it wherever his head is, even if he's a smaller dog. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to approach the kennel. I'm going to fit my 5-inch by 5-inch square to where his head is. I'm going to smile, and I'm going to say, every time I present my fist, I'm going to go in a baby sing-song talk. Hello there. How are you? Hello there. How are you? And I'm going to, every time I say hello there, that's the amount of time I would hold my fist at the first corner of the square. How are you? That's how much I'm at the second square. Hello there, third square. How are you? Fourth square. And the sociable dogs will come up and either lick or nuzzle or try to touch your fist 3 or 4 times. Mm-hmm. So they come and they follow with you for not just 1 or 2, but for 3 or all 4. Those are most sociable dogs. Now, here's the exclusion. If the dog is sniffing instead of licking or nuzzling, and he's sniffing the hand, that does not count as sociability. So you're looking for a dog who's, loose and wiggly, and his spine and his head are not in alignment. He's not stiff, and he's following the hand as you go. And with the understanding that, let's say you went to a shelter that had 50 kennels, and you did this 50 times for all, one time for all 50 dogs, there may not be a sociable dog in that particular shelter. Like, there aren't sociable dogs in every shelter, and on any given day. And so I think an adopter has to be prepared to make multiple visits and to understand that if you have a funny feeling or a bad feeling or a doubtful feeling about a dog, I would say pass and come back. You'll know sociability when you see it. And this is what adopters always say if you interview them afterwards, and you say, okay, why did you pick that dog? And at first they might say something more superficial, like, oh, well, they were all pit bulls and he wasn't a pit bull, or he was the size we wanted, or whatever they might say. But if you press them and you say, well, but why that dog? The thing they almost always say is, well, he chose me. And what they mean, they're bending down and looking into every kennel, and they're smiling and they're hopeful and they're anticipating finding their best friend, right? And the connection that they feel when they feel the dog chooses them, it's the dog offering sociability to them. The dog is mirroring their emotions. The dog is smiling. The dog is wagging. The dog's like, oh my God, I was hoping, this is so anthropomorphic, but I was hoping you might be the perfect family for me, while the people are like, oh, we're hoping you're the perfect dog for us.
Right.
With caveat in mind that a perfect dog does not exist. Every single dog have behavior problems of some kind. What we're trying to avoid is aggression, right? And the deal
Right.
breaker.
Right.
Separation anxiety and such. So, yeah.
Well, those are great. The other thing is I like the fact that you said there's a difference between sniffing and trying to actively engage, licking or whatever, because there's a very big difference between a dog who is environmentally interested and a dog who's people interested. And there's also a very big difference between the social versus the aroused dog.
Absolutely. And people, like I always tell people, a dog can't just look friendly. He must act friendly. He must behave in a friendly manner, right? Because if he's panting, wagging his tail, and you might think, oh, look, he's smiling, he's so happy, but he might not be any of those things. He may simply be aroused and excited due to the environment, or that's just who he is. So you want behavior, right? You want that dog to approach the hand and to follow it in an engaged way without sniffing 3 or 4 times.
Right, because one of the things that you want is you want a dog who's going to have a gentle interaction with you for somewhere between 2 to 3 seconds. Right. The thing that people don't understand is, in what I really don't like, is when a dog uses me as like a backboard. They pounce off of me.
Yeah.
And that, oh, he's so friendly, he's coming up and saying hi. No, he's using me as a backboard. I am, that is not friendly. That's arousal. And that might be a dog saying, tag, you're it.
Yes.
And I'm out of here.
It's like you wouldn't allow a human to come up to you and expel air by hitting you in the stomach so hard, saying, hey, good to know you. What's friendly for a human is often the equivalent friendly for a dog. They just do it more. They have a tail that's visible and they move their ears more than we do. But yeah.
Right. And the other thing is you need to be careful. Speaking of tails, you need to be careful of that tail. Just because it's wagging does not necessarily mean that he's friendly. And
number one, right?
Yes. Especially it's like, oh, his tail was straight up. I'm like, yo, yay.
Yeah, not good.
Not good. That tail is straight up and that hard stare and those ears are forward. I'm like, this is a dog who has some issues here that may or may not be appropriate for a family situation. If he is that confident, that assertive, that sort of, I don't want to say dominant, but domineering is a dog that you need to have some caution with if you're talking about small children in your family. So, well, I think these are great things that you have mentioned to us and given us a lot of things for our listeners to think about. And that the social drive is something that is truly important. And as you said, you'll know it when you see it. You'll have that connection with the dog, the idea that he chose you. And I think that's a great way of putting it. Do you have some links or some website that people can go to take a look that may have some more of this information?
Right now, my behavior library, I have a behavior video library. It's down. And so it's just under construction. But my DVDs available through Dogwise and also Tosser Videos has, they can stream them and rent them. I have a whole DVD called Understanding Sociability.
Great.
And that's videos of dogs, and that one is really helpful. And then my latest book is Assessing Aggression Thresholds. And it's in 3 parts. The first part is for shelters, how to assess their dogs. And the second part is for trainers, how to modify it. But the third part is on how to do your part to be the most successful dog owner. But that book, a layperson can follow. There's nothing mystical about it. A professional would understand, and a non-dog owner wouldn't. It's it should be clear for anyone and can be used as a guide.
Okay, well, great. Well, maybe you can send us links for both your book and for the Understanding Sociability DVD. We'll put those on the website or on the show notes. So thank you so much, Sue. It's been great to talk with you. And hope to have you back again. Maybe next time we can talk about dog parks. Always an interesting subject.
Always. I'd be glad to. Yes.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. We're glad you could join us.
Thanks for listening to Your Family Dog. Got questions? Interesting ideas? Colleen and Julie would love to hear them. Call 614-349-1661 or visit www.yourfamilydogpodcast.com to share your thoughts.